Okay, good morning. In Austria, good afternoon. Welcome to our first section on Sustainable Talks project. I have the pleasure to coordinate this project. This is a project from the undergraduate energy engineering course and graduate energy and sustainability program. And this is our first edition, and I'm very happy to receive Professor Markus Tomaselli from the Technological University of Vienna. And I read briefly your short biography, okay?
Okay.
Then Markus Tomaselli was born in Innsbruck. He has been working as an architect in Vienna since 1996. He focuses on urban structural designs and strategies of transformation, as well building and existing buildings. He is a member of the Chamber of Architects and Engineering Consultants in Vienna, and he has been teaching at the University of Technology, at the Vienna University of Technology since 1996. Okay, then, please.
That's quite a while already. Thank you so much for introducing me.
Thank you.
So my presentation is clearly from the point of view from an architect, and I will keep it short on those phases where it's dealing more or less with architecture. But as we talk about cities and as we talk about our built environment, I think architecture is an important part of it, even if you are engineers for environmental aspects. So to introduce you a little bit about the background that we are talking is the city of Vienna is a Roman foundation, not as a city, but as a fortification. And we see the Roman castle here on the river bench of the Danube River. And what we also see that, as you might know from the history of architecture or other in another context, the Roman fortification usually has been a rectangular figure. But in this case, you clearly see that it's a damaged rectangular configuration. It's damaged because of the river. It's damaged because of landslides that have been caused by floodings that are an aspect of this huge Danube River that was threatening the city for centuries or thousands of years even. And what we also see is that the fortification had some surroundings, which is nowadays the first district of Vienna, the imperial center of the city of Vienna, and some additional developments outside the original city configuration or the urbanized area, which are in a contact of the Roman fortification. But what we see today is a very different configuration, of course. We see a huge belt of green forest area around the city. We see vineyards. We see these are the suburbs of Vienna in the western part. And we see in the background the Danube River, which is nowadays a regulated riverbed. So it has a very efficient flood protection system, which was important last year when you had the floodings in South Brazil, in Rio Grande do Sul. We had a very similar situation in Austria, but Vienna was not harmed at all because of this very efficient flood protection. I come to that later. Just to give you an impression, we have an urbanized area mostly built up in the 19th century. We have some residential districts that are less dense and less configured in that time. And we have a very strong department of urban planning that is focusing on the strategic development of the city since many, many decades. What we see here are the recent development plans. That's the STEP, is the Stadtentwicklungsplan, the Urban Development Plan, that is valid until 2025. Now we are developing a new one. And it has a general strategic approach that is defining areas of intervention and areas of interest for the growth or for the development of the city. But it also has some specific, more detailed side letters, we could tell them, about green space, about mobility, about infrastructure and things like that. So this is somehow the administrative framework under which the city council works and develops further implementations. This is an aerial view of the city of Vienna, and what we see here is the regulated riverbed. I hope you can see the mouse. The regulated riverbed, which is divided in two parts. One is the floodwater protection part, and one is the riverbed of the Danube, which is the standard use of the river. So only in emergency cases, the second one is opened and becomes part of the Danube as well. This works very efficiently, but also creates an enormous lake in the city center, which is a recreational area nowadays. This picture is very old and it shows the development and the construction process of this area. What we also see are some remains of the old riverbed, which was very much changing during the time, and even every spring it changed its position. And these remaining arms of the river, they are also recreational infrastructure nowadays for the city of Vienna. This is a more recent picture of this island, this artificial island, that also shows in the different color of the water. This is the recreational part, and this is the riverbed of the Danube in a regular, let's say, in a standard situation. This was one of the most important infrastructural investments in the city of Vienna in the last couple of 100 years, I would say. Beside maybe the water supply that has been built from the mountains of the Alps to the city, this was the second the second most important regulation or the most important infrastructure that has been done. And it also changed, of course, the possibilities of the city to develop in this direction, because now the riverbed is clearly defined and the areas on the other side of the Danube are more accessible. And as we can see, it is a very important, especially nowadays, we have 36 degrees today. It's a very important recreational area and also a microclimatic aspect for the city of Vienna, because the main wind direction is along the Danube River, and it's a cooling element in the whole city. This combination of wind and water that is influencing also this neighboring districts of the city. As I mentioned before, one of the advantages of this regulation of the city was the development of the other side of the Danube, so on opposite of the old historic city center. The development of the city nowadays is very strong. And one of the main projects that are undergoing now at the moment is the Seestadt Aspern. Seestadt means lake town, and the name-giving lake is a small lake in the center of this new development that follows a master plan by Profa architects, and under let's say a framework, a guidance by Jan Gehl regarding the public spaces. Gehl did a very interesting study about the possible developments of this new neighborhood. It's a city for about 20,000 inhabitants and has a direct connection to the city center by a subway line. And this picture shows an important aspect in the thinking of Jan Gehl, which I would like to explain a little bit. It shows about 1900, so 1900. We have an enormous amount of public space used for necessary activities. That means transportation, that means also working in public spaces, manufacturing even, and a very small part of the use of public spaces was unnecessary, recreational, or things like that. But that changed dramatically. It changed. So we have in our public space nowadays mostly recreational and other urban, not really necessary activities. And the necessary, economically necessary activities are reduced. The percentage and the amount is reduced. And what's appearing now in the last, let's say, decades, is that we use the public space also for active mobility, for example, for running, for riding bicycles, for scooters, for all these kind of new modes of mobility that we have now in the public space, while we have only since the 1950s an amount of cars that is occupying public space in the cities. This is maybe not a totally correct graphic, it's more an abstract visualization, because the car, of course, is not a constant factor, it is a growing factor. So the amount of space that is occupied by cars is growing at least until, I would say, 1990, 2000. Maybe nowadays that changed. I will come to that later. And we have an amount of space that is nowadays used for pedestrian use only, or for other modes of mobility, which are growing and which are also not constant. But it gives an idea about the changes of the use of public spaces, and I think therefore this is an important introduction to how we started dealing with public space in the new development of the Seestadt, this peripheral development of Vienna. So in general, I can explain you the situation there. It is a master plan that contains a lot of housing, a lot of residential areas. Some parts are more related to economic activities, or maybe even some small industries or light industries. There is a train track bordering the neighborhood in the north, and a subway line penetrating the neighborhood and connecting this directly to the city center of Vienna in a 15-20 minutes ride. There is a ring road, which is a kind of connecting street layout that contains several modes of transportation, motorized individual traffic as well as bicycles or pedestrian. And there are two chords, a red chord, or maybe three chords. A red chord that is primarily determined by commercial and cultural activities. It's going around the lake. This is the lake area, and connects also the subway lines. It is combining the different areas for schools and education, of course. And then there's a blue chord. This is the water. This is more or less the lake, and it's surrounding green space, and a green corridor that is connecting the two green spaces that are on both sides of this development, provided also distance to the existing single family houses that are around, because this development is not low density development. What we see now is a project, one of the many projects for subsidized and social housing that we are developing in this area. And is an interesting project, a year ago finished by architect König Lach. She is a good friend of mine, and is quite representative for the situation that we have there. And what we also see in this configuration is that we are not allowing cars to park on the street anymore, which is a huge problem in the historic cities all over Europe. Maybe you have heard about the interventions in Paris. They just recently had a voting to kick out cars of 500 streets and not allow parking there anymore. So very similar is in this new development, the approach of garages, building high-rise garages that are providing parking space, not only for one building, but for a neighborhood. So you force people to enter the public space, to walk through the public space to get to their car. And by that, you also change the mobility mode. So people start using public transportation because they anyway have to walk to their car. And they're not going downstairs by the elevator into the underground parking and then leave their residential district to their working space directly by car. So this is a very important decision that has been made in the general plan by Trovat architects and now is implemented in all the architectural developments. I will go through that very quickly because you are not architects so much, but you see there are a lot of public functions facing the public space, and you have the entrance to the garage and some specific housing situations. These are floor plans. You see that there's the parking. It is totally separated from the residential building. So you have to go down, you have to go out, and you have to re-enter this building or any other building in the surrounding that is connected with this parking. Yes, parking. This is one of the most important aspects in the transformation of cities nowadays is the motorized individual traffic, the cars. They occupy an enormous amount of space, which we nowadays need not only for the residents as a creation, as a area for recreation or a place to be, but also, and this is a most important aspect, to deal with the rainfall that is changing, that is growing, that is intensifying, and the climatic, especially the microclimatic aspects in the public space. So what we see here is from Victor Gruen, one of the impressions in his interventions to provide some public functions in the monofunctional suburban neighborhoods of the United States in the 50s. Victor Gruen, by the way, was a Viennese architect that immigrated to the United States. But under this ideology of a car-friendly city, we rebuilt, especially after the Second World War, when a lot of European cities have been heavily destroyed, we built car-friendly cities even in the center of our historic cities. And what we see here are remains of this approach that we tried to create a massive flow of cars and allow these cars to flow continuously through the historic environment, and of course destroyed the neighborhoods and damaged them a lot. This is just to give you an idea how we can use public space under the impression of cars, buses, and trains or metro tracks. So when we have a 175-meter wide road, we use that by car, then it's totally occupied by cars. If we use buses, like Brazil does a lot, your public transport system is based on buses, then this is also reducing a lot the space that is needed, but still it needs a lot of street surface to be able to maintain the needs of transportation. And when you go further to tramways, metros, and so on, that it can be reduced even more for the need of transportation, and you gain space for the green space, for water management, but also, of course, for pedestrians and active modes of transportation. This is just let's say a measure that gives you an idea how we think that we should have nowadays the use of the street space, the public space in between the buildings newly defined, because nowadays we have parking on one or two sides minimum in every street. We have nearly no green in our streets. This is different from Brazil, where you have a lot greener cities than we have here. And we have small sidewalks, which you hardly can pass through, trolleys for babies or whatever. So this is something we have to rethink totally. And this is caused by huge problems that we are facing now in both aspects, the management of rainwater, but also the microclimatic development of the cities. We have nowadays continuous phases of hot weather in many, many cities, especially in Southern Europe, but also in Middle Europe nowadays, with around 40 degrees for many days. And this is harming the population a lot. What we see here is just a kind of combination of aspects that you all know about. Of course, the global warming, that is also related, of course, to the amount of built-up area that is growing as well. So our cities become bigger. The sealed surface is becoming bigger. So this threatening us in many, many aspects. And this is causing the heat island effects that we are facing now in all the metropolis. This is illustrating in a very simple way the shift that in temperature, in the weather conditions or in the climate conditions that we have in Europe, when we see where Rome is approximately here, yeah. So this is now already south of the Alps, and what we have here in Vienna, we are located here, yeah. So we have a climate that is in, yeah, Mediterranean, yeah, and not anymore, yeah, intermediate continental situation. So this brings us to the aspect of transforming public spaces. And this public space, this just shows an illustration how to transform a public space in New York, but it's a global issue and it's going on in Korea as well as it happened in the United States. I don't know how they will continue now because they don't have climate change there anymore. It's prohibited by law. So, but we have this situation here in Austria. This is Vienna. The upper picture is Vienna, how it looks like nowadays. We have a massive use of MEV, motorized individual transportation in the streets. We have a lot of cars parking there for days or weeks even. We have sidewalks that hardly can be used as such. And this is the impact that we want to generate in the transformation of the city nowadays by bringing back public space to the residents and also to the modes of transportation that are more sustainable. But it's also a going back, because when we look at the same street over the centuries, then we see that until the approach of the cars, until 1900, let's say, this was a zone of merging modes of transport. So there were pedestrians, there were trains or small bonges, as you call them, the tramways, bicycles, whatever you wanted to do in the public environment was possible. You could work there, you could sell your stuff there, you could walk there, you could ride the tramway. And that changed after the Second World War. And it became a dominant by cars, and it pushed aside all the other functions, all the other uses of the public space. And now, same street, it's one of the streets close to my apartment in Vienna, the Marie-Hilfer-Straße, is again a street that has changed a lot in the ways how it can be used. Nowadays, the metro is underground and there is no tramway anymore, but it is a street for pedestrians, it's a street for cyclists, and we have two views to the same situation right here, and we see an enormous change in the quality of life that this public space can provide to the neighborhood. So these are some examples that I can show from Vienna, but they are also happening in many other places. In Paris, I mentioned already before, they try to do exactly the same things, and they are very successful in that, kicking out the parking lots from the city. We see that in Toulouse, similar situation. We see that in Paris, along the channels, but also in more in smaller streets and in residential neighborhoods. And we are discussing nowadays also the reopening of rivers. What we see here is the Vienna River, a small river in Vienna that gives the name to the city. It's not the Danube, it's the Vienna River. And this river was, of course, a dangerous river because it is a more alpine river. That means it's raising its levels very fast and enormously. And that caused a technical intervention in the 19th century, in 1890s or 1885, something like that. They started to provide a flood protection system, and on the side of it, a subway line to make it safer for the surrounding neighborhoods, because this situation, of course, influenced a lot in a flood situation the neighboring residential district. This works very well from the point of view of flood protection. But it is on the same time, it is of course a sealed surface. It has no connection anymore with the groundwater. And it is of course a separation of sewage system and river that is also absolutely necessary. What we are discussing now is to implement new modes of transportation above the river itself, to provide extra space in case of flooding in huge tunnels that are following the river beside its original riverbed. Of course, the subway and of course the sewage system is separated. And in some parts, we are also reopening the riverbed to make this connection to the groundwater possible, but also to implement more green space in this, let's say, blue infrastructure that is so essential for the microclimate and the quality of life in our cities. Another aspects of reuse of urban space are technical infrastructures like these train tracks that are elevated, and they are covering these arches, which are used for small businesses or even light industry. And this is also transformed into a very different neighborhood nowadays. We see this example in Paris, but we also see it in many other places, like the Gürtel in Vienna, which looked like that. Technically, completely identical situation, and the interventions are also very, very similar. That what's going on in Paris also happened in Vienna. The only difference is that in Paris, you also have a park on top of these tracks because they are not used anymore, while we still have the subway line running on these ancient rail tracks. Yeah, and there are many more that have to come in the future. Germany, for example, another city, Düsseldorf, middle of Germany, we see the results of the car-friendly policies from the 60s and 50s in the picture, in the lower picture, and the same situation nowadays in Düsseldorf, in the center of Düsseldorf. The only thing that is different to the policy that is followed in Paris is that the cars didn't disappear. They just went underground. So the Germans still have their road infrastructure alive, and they provide it in the city centers, but they cover it and they put it underground to reuse the public space in between those central institutions for the public, for the pedestrians, for the bicycles, and so on. So we see a little bit the tunnel, the approach of the ramp that later on leads to this public space. And this public space, of course, is a sealed public space mostly, and there is a road under it, so it's not penetrating the green space to the groundwater. There is no connection, which is usually very important. But this makes it possible to grow huge trees which give shade, and if you can't provide that, you have to help yourself with other technical infrastructures like this vaporization that's cooling down the public spaces. So this is a section through a street in the 19th century. We have the sewage system, we have some gas, some electricity, and some public transport, sidewalks, and a kind of street. And what we see here is nowadays the infrastructure that we have in the same kind of street. Of course, the sewage still remains, but there are hundreds of other tubes and pipes that are now appearing under the surface of our streets. And this technical infrastructure, although it's very helpful to have a fast internet, is making it very difficult to reorganize the public space, because you have to deal with what's under the surface. You have to deal with it because you need to implement new technical infrastructure to make trees alive, to keep trees alive in an urban surrounding. They need to have water, they need to have access to water, they need to have access to water reservoirs, because they otherwise you have an enormous amount of maintenance, I mean, in financial aspects, because you need to water them nearly daily in hot periods. And they don't grow properly if they don't have the soil that they need to grow. So these kind of things that are organized here, they are under the responsibility of many different institutions. And to make them work together to allow a change of public space into something that is called a swamp city, that is collecting the water, keeping the water that comes, especially during heavy rainfall, and later on provides it continuously to the new neighbors, the trees. This is something that needs to be done very carefully and needs also a lot of administrative work. Not only planning, but also administration is a topic. Coming back to this river that has been sealed in the 19th century, the closer you come to the city center, the more it is becoming problematic to reopen the riverbeds. You have no space around the river anymore because it's occupied by other functions or even by buildings. And so to provide some more green space, some more public space, they started to cover parts of it with squares, public squares that provide a certain microclimatic condition, but also, and this is even more important, places to be, places to stay, residential, better quality of life for the residents of the neighborhood. These are some impressions about that. And this is also appearing in parts of the Danube River, where we use old infrastructure like this huge block of stone and concrete in the middle of the riverbed for new gardens, for new public spaces, to enlarge a little bit the let's say the green space and the parks in the city center, which is of course more problematic than the suburb because you have less space available for this kind of infrastructure, which is becoming more and more necessary, and people are using these public spaces more and more intensively. You know about Barcelona super quadras. This is a very similar approach to what we have in many other cities. We also try to copy this kind of approach nowadays in Vienna in some very heavily sealed areas and the very densely built up areas of the city. where they interrupted the grid of the streets by areas that are only for the use of pedestrians and cyclists, and of course some public functions like maybe gastronomy or so on. So you see this classical intersection in the grid of Barcelona by Cerdà. Cerdà is now a street that is separated from its, yeah, we could really call it a park. Huh? It is a kind of densely covered and shaded public space that gives a very high quality to the neighborhood. But this doesn't only happen formally. When you go to the south of Europe, in Albania, for example, in its capital, Tirana, the residents started to occupy or reoccupy the public space in an informal way. They started to put their plants, their greens into the formerly used by cars parking lots and occupy or reoccupy the public space for their needs as residents. So this is also a kind of development that we see in many places, especially in the south of Europe, where the initiative doesn't come from the authorities, but it comes from the residents. In Paris, we see, and I'm sorry, but Paris is just an amazing place when you see the quality of design that they are using for a simple crossing of railway tracks or tram tracks. It's amazing. Yeah? And they are opening also the tracks of the tramway so that these are square meters or hectares even, because it's a huge infrastructure that can absorb rainwater, that can keep humidity and somehow change the microclimatic conditions in the city. Also here some impressions about the T10 tramway line that they implemented in that way. Also Paris, use pictures of Harald, but I also was there in last year, and I saw that this Seine riverbed has dramatically changed, and nowadays it looks like that the traffic, the kind of highway that existed along the Seine River is gone, and it doesn't collapse the traffic situation in Paris, or not more than before, but you gained a lot of square meters, thousands of square meters of public space directly connected to the water of the Seine River, which is nowadays, as we recently saw in TV and in the news, in a condition that you even can swim again. So this is really dramatically changing the urban spaces all over Europe in many, many cities. What we are focusing now on as well is the transformation of buildings. It is the reuse and readaptation of buildings according to the needs of climate change. And this is done by a lot of solar panels, of course, but also by vertical greenery. And this is just one of the examples I would like to show. A hotel in Vienna, very close to the train station, which is also providing the water for the toilets, for example, from cisterns that are collecting the rainwater. And so they are not using drinking water anymore for the toilets and so on. So this is also a change that is now happening in a few single objects, but becoming more and more a topic also in the planning instruments and in the building regulations all over Europe. And this will change a lot the way we have to plan and to think the technical infrastructure of buildings in our world. This is a transformation of a historic building into a more sustainable, naturally climatized building, which does not use air conditioning to keep the temperatures below 25 degrees in the living rooms. So they added, of course, insulation. They added also cooling systems by water in the ceilings of the rooms, and a shading system outside the windows, which is way more efficient than inside. Also, they added some rooftop gardens, and of course, as we can see here, there has been a rooftop apartment added to the building in this process of reconstructing the technical infrastructure. And the backside of the building shows a very different architecture. So you have widely glazed flat roofs, which are a lot of green. And so this changed a lot. This is the floor plan. I go through that very quickly because you are not architects. Another impression of that building, just to get the feeling how you can do, what you can do with historic buildings in the adaptation for the needs that we have nowadays in our urban environment. This is Lacaton Vassal's project of a tower of the 50s, and that's how it looks nowadays. They added a second layer to the building. So this is the original floor plan, and what we see now are these additional parts that have been opening, and they're allowed to open and close these balconies in a way that you have a kind of buffer zone, a thermal buffer zone, which is allowing also to keep the temperatures in a comfort level without using air condition, according to the needs of Paris. Of course, it's not Morocco. So it's another issue. But still, they also have very hot weather conditions nowadays, and this still works. This brings me to another topic that is also very important regarding sustainability. It is, what are we doing with the materials that already exist in our built-up cities? Usually, when we do a transformation, we break down the building and build a new one. But this also changed. And what we see here is a reconfiguration of prefabricated concrete slabs and walls into a new neighborhood. This was caused by an aspect that happened in Eastern Germany in the last decades, the migration from people from the East to the West. And therefore, they had a phenomenon that is called shrinking cities. They lose inhabitants. They have a lot of empty apartments. And by reconfiguration, by reconfiguring the architecture, they could also gain a lot of quality in the architecture, in the building itself, by using the materials they had before in around these empty apartments. Yeah? What we see here is, of course, there's a lack of apartments now, or a loss of apartments, not a lack, a loss of apartments. But it was also necessary because the population was shrinking. And they added private open space to the apartments or to the residential buildings, with privatized gardens, but also balconies, terraces, and so on, to improve the quality of the apartments. This is a project that happened recently in Vienna in a very central area. It is a shopping mall. But this shopping mall contains not only IKEA and some other shops, it is also a public space. So on top of this building, we have a public garden, which has some areas for consuming, like bars and restaurants, but is also freely accessible for the whole neighborhood, and has infrastructure or equipment for spending your time there without consuming anything. Yeah? You don't have to pay for that. And it's on top of this building, which is a very commercial construction, a simple box, but of course framed with this grid of steel beams and steel columns that carry green spaces and that carry, of course, advertisement for this building. This is a project by OMA for an investor that bankrupted recently, but also the same strategy, public space on top of it. So also here, it was necessary to get the building permission to open up the rooftop in a certain amount to the public, to the city, and keep it freely accessible for the residents of the neighborhood. The Mountain of Big in Copenhagen is a different approach, but to provide residential units above the parking. In this case, they are terraced houses, is also something where you have to integrate different functions and mixed use in one superstructure to keep the use of land as low as possible. So you don't put the things one beside the other, you put them one above the other and reduce the impact on the land by a densification process. Yeah, we just visited recently this building. It was really impressive. That brings me to the, let's say, final aspect of my lecture, the vernacular architecture. We already invented a lot of very important things in the history of mankind that we sometimes forget to use again. And these, for example, are ventilation systems that are used to suck out by the wind, by the airflow, suck out hot temperature, hot air out of the buildings and to refill it via water surfaces and so on to keep the climate within the buildings on a comfortable level. Or we have open rivers, open creeks in our cities, like in the city of Bern in Switzerland, or the fountains that we had in many of our cities, in the historic city centers. We had these public fountains with fresh, cold water, providing also a microclimatic effect to the public space. The same thing is about sidewalks. They are in many, many historic cities in Spain, as well as in Italy, but also in Austria and in Switzerland and so on. We have these covered sidewalks which provide rain protection, but also sun protection. And market squares or spaces, like here in Bergamo, where you can interact economically or socially in the society without being exposed to the sun or exposed to the rainy weather conditions, depends on the situation. And of course, we have all the Arabian cities that we can learn a lot from when it's about heat management, heat waves in urban neighborhoods, like here in Marrakesh, the shading of the souk. So this was my contribution to your lecture series, and I'm open to your questions. We have now 49 minutes. I'm sorry for the a little bit extended time, but I hope I could provide some helpful information for the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for your presentation. And it's really very interesting to see the examples in Europe and also now, by the end also in Arabic countries. And I'd like to open for questions in case you have a question. I have a question, but before making the question, I'd like to listen to the students here, to the those who are present here, participating, who, if you have some question. You can also write the question in the chat instead of...
Yes, of course. You also can ask in Portuguese. Sometimes I understand a little bit. If you speak slowly and simple.
Hello.
Hello. Hello, Professor Markus. I think I could try in English. Good morning, Professor Markus. Are you hearing me well?
Yes, very well. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, Professor Markus. Thank you for insightful presentation. How does a public policy like the multilateral coordination for Danube River protection help make cities more sustainable? You can focus on the Vienna approach, for instance.
The Danube River regulation happened in the 19th century. And it was built by the same machinery that built the Suez Canal. So they brought the machinery from there along the river to the Danube in Vienna and started digging this very straight restructuring of the riverbed. So this was not intended to improve the situation in an ecological way. This was a technical intervention to keep the floodwater out of the city, which was at that time harming the city not only because of floods, but also because of ice. At that time, the river has been frozen for many weeks every winter, which is not happening anymore due to the climate change. But this ice was a huge danger for the neighboring urban structures, buildings, technical infrastructure, and so on. So that's why they did that. In the 80s, end of 70s, this floodwater protection was, according to new calculations, not anymore sufficient enough. And then they started to build this second riverbed. Yeah, so this intervention, 100 years later, more or less, started creating this island. And this island has two main functions nowadays from the point of sustainability. One is the floodwater protection, of course, the technical aspect, but the other one is the microclimatic aspect and the recreational aspect. So this is bringing comfort to the city. Comfort because it creates a 20-kilometer long lake, which has two coastlines, which are both public accessible. That means it's a kind of beach, also not in the quality of a Brazilian beach, but still you can access to the water and you can swim there and you can use it as a recreational area. And it's an enormous green space, which is since the 70s growing and developing. And the trees nowadays, they are voluminous, so they are big, and they are influencing the microclimatic situation in a corridor of 20 kilometers all through the city. So this is what the history of this island in the Danube River.
Thank you.
More questions?
Hello. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Professor Markus. I had some doubts before this lecture, but I thought very interesting. I would like to say that it already answered many of my doubts, because I was trying to imagine how could we help the already built cities to be more green. So we saw many good examples and I enjoyed very much. And that's it. Thank you for this presentation.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you. I mean, we have a huge fight in all the cities between those that are used and are using the cars and those that are trying to regain the public space as a public space for all. So this conflict, of course, we still have and we will have, I think, even for a long period going on.
I have one more question here in the chat from Luis, and the question is, how is access to modified public space where individual car access is no longer allowed being planned for people with disabilities as well as for families with small children who cannot easily move around on their own and must now travel long distance to reach, for example, a pharmacy.
Yeah, okay. This is, of course, a very important question. Thank you for that. Luis, it is like we have a huge advantage in European cities. And this huge advantage is short distances. We have short distances to all the necessary infrastructure. When we talk about Paris and the mayor of Paris, who tried to clean the city from the cars, she also has formulated the idea of a 15 minutes city. That means you reach everything you need for your daily life within 15 minutes by walking. And we have in our historic cities, we have this situation since centuries. So when I go out of my apartment in Vienna and I enter this public space that is nowadays free of cars and provides no parking anymore, then I have a pharmacy in 200 meters. I have a grocery store in 100 meters. I have a restaurant in 5 meters. This means that you have mixed functions in this historic neighborhoods only, yeah? Because we are not talking about the suburbs. We are just talking about this historic city, which allow you to do everything you need by walking. And even if you're handicapped and you're in a wheelchair, you can do that. Because all the surfaces are barrier-free nowadays. So where the situation is different are developments, let's say, after Second World War, from the 50s ongoing, where we have monofunctional situations with, wait just a second, monofunctional situations where a lot of residential buildings are separated from, let's say, shopping areas, where you have all the facilities that you have in the historic cities mixed everywhere, collected or connected together in one area with a parking lot in front of it and so on. So here we have a very different situation, and here we have to restructurize also the neighborhoods, which means we have to change the use of ground floors, we have to densify, we have to provide accessibility, of course, also to different needs of everyday life. Yeah, that's absolutely correct. But we have to think in two different ways because the situations are very different before the Second World War and after the Second World War. Yeah, and just to add one word to this question, also included the question when you are not allowed anymore to park a car in the street, how can you access to facilities? Of course, the denser the city is, the better is the public transport, or the easier it is to provide sufficient public transport. And also the public transport, of course, is barrier-free.
Thank you. And I have one more question because I have to take care of the time. And Professor Tomaselli, you have been working in Latin America as guest professor, even in Brazil, then you know our reality. And my question is, what lessons from Viennese or European strategies for sustainability could be realistically adopted to countries with rapid urbanization, for example, like Brazil?
This is a very difficult question because it takes so much time. And the urbanization process that has been happening in Europe in the 19th century, which was a bit similar to what is going you call favelas, we had plenty of them in Vienna before the First World War and after the First World War. So this, to get rid of these things is a question of decades, if not centuries. That means if you're, I would recommend to invest in social housing. Because what brought our cities a huge step forward in many, many aspects was the investment in social housing. And not only in the housing as a monofunctional building, but in a cluster of social infrastructure as well, like schools, libraries, recreational facilities, and so on. Of course, we are speaking nowadays about different scales. That means a city in Brazil with 10, 20 million inhabitants is different from a city in Europe as it was Vienna at that time with maybe 2 million inhabitants. Yeah? But I think that this is a way that has to be done and has to be gone. And regarding the public spaces, there has been made a mistake in the 50s when you got rid of the tramways to focus on buses. And I think as Rio started in the city center, I think this would be, or this could be a solution for some cities to invest more in public transport, and it should not be the subway, because the subway is horribly expensive. It should be the tramway. I would propose the tramway as a rapid tramway, a light railway system, for many cities replacing BRT systems or bus lines.
Okay, thank you. Yes, maybe we've got some good projects in Latin America talking about social housing. Maybe not exactly social housing, but projects with infrastructure for places like what you call favelas or communities nowadays in Medellin or also in Buenos Aires. I guess have good examples of good projects there. I'm not sure. Maybe in Rio they are starting something, and in Porto Alegre they start discussing about that, and I'm not sure if we will have something this direction. But yeah, and
in Rio the tramway is only catering the city center.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
It's not helpful for people that need transport.
Yes,
because the people there, they are usually rich.
exactly.
Or they are, yeah. So, or they are not poor. And I think there has to be done a shift to those that are in need of transportation.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. And I'd like to thank you very much for
You're welcome.
participating of our first edition of this project. I'd like to thank you, all the participants, for the interest. And I hope we can have a new opportunity to exchange.
Maybe even in person. I'm in Brazil from the middle of February till the end of May.
Okay, great.
Next year.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, great.
I will have a guest professorship at PUC in Porto Alegre.
Wow, that is not
but it won't take all my time, so I will be able to visit also others. Thank you for inviting me. It was a great pleasure, and I also would look forward to meet you in person. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Have a good
nice
day.
And a nice vacation.
Thank you. Thank you. Next week starting.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks a lot, guys. Obrigada.